Alright, welcome back to yet another tutorial. And today we're going to be looking at 3 fun ways to use photos and illustrations. And unlike some of my other tutorials, or most of them, this is not going to be a short, concise video where I just throw information at you. This is going to be more of a workshop style video, as I've done one before, where you're just able to follow along with me and just see how I get to something, just how I reach a certain final result. And you're still going to be learning some tools in Clip Studio Paint that I use along the process. You're still going to be learning some new methods that you might not be aware of, but it's going to be just a little bit slower paced. And I will be doing a little summary text version of it, so if you're short on time, you can just find that in the comments and look at that later. All right, so let's just jump right in. And the first method that we have is to use photos as references. And you're probably like, well, duh. I know this. I use photos as references all the time. I use Clip Studio Paint's awesome subview window, and I go in here and I import photos. I know that I can drag and drop to import multiple photos at once, or hold down the control key to select individual photos and just load those right in. I know that I can rotate the photos. I know that recently Clip Studio Paint added a little gallery feature where now I can just look up multiple reference photos that I have added in and just quickly jump between them. And I know I can zoom in and I can press spacebar to navigate around. And yeah, I know all that. You don't have to tell me. I know I can mirror the images, I can navigate through them, I can use the color picker tool here to pick a specific color from them. There we go. See, that's the color. I know all this. And I know you know all this. But what we're going to do is we're going to be looking at a different way to use photos as references. Because what if you want to have a reference for something that doesn't exist? It only exists in your head. And you may be like, okay, so I have a vague idea of what I want. And you're like, I want to create a fantasy building, but maybe you're not really into architecture much. You're interested in it, but you don't know how to construct a building. So what you might want to do is you just go around the city and you just take photos of places that you think look interesting. And that can be your starting point. So for example, I like this building here. I think it's kind of interesting. Just the little arch down there makes it kind of interesting and unique. But I don't want to just copy that building as it is, especially since I think, there's some other buildings I found that have also interesting architectural details. So what we're going to do is we're going to combine those photos. And you can be detailed about this. You can just be like trying to get like the similar angles and whatever. But for now, what we're going to do is we're just going to use the lasso tool. And we're just going to roughly make a selection here of this building's roof, and we're just going to plop that right down here. And now what we're going to do is we're going to hit Control T, which alternatively we can also find under Transform, and we can use the Control T as the Scale or Rotate option, and we can just move this roof in place to better match the kind of building that I want to create. So as you can see, I'm able to rotate, I'm able to scale things up and down. Maybe you want things to be taller, or just squish things for the reference a little bit. And if you go here to the tool property window, you can uncheck Keep Aspect Ratio. And now you can make this more tall if you'd like, or you can just turn it back on. Another thing you can do is you can hold down the Control key And then you can see that the cursor, when you mouse over one of the corners, it kind of turns white. So this is when you're turning, you're jumping into the free transform mode. And when you're jumping into the free transform mode, you can just individually adjust like the little corners, which helps if you want to, kind of match the perspective of one building's element with another. So I think this is good for the roof, but let's just keep adding to it. So here, there's another fun little roof detail that I enjoyed. And I'm just gonna be copying that as well, just pulling it over. And I kind of want to use that as a little awning, like little covering for this little section where you can go under, so that there's just a little roof jutting out. And again, this is not it's not required that this looks like perfect or realistic. You're just kind of helping yourself visualize how you want this building to look. You're just trying things out. You're just seeing what might work, and you're just combining all these elements. So here's another interesting roof detail. You could also just go here and use, in a case like this, use the selection tool. And then when you have selected the sky, you can invert the selection with Control-Shift-I, or if you go to Select and click Invert Selected Area, then you can immediately have that turned around. And you can also use the lasso tool while holding down Alt to remove something from your current selection. So if you only want to copy this part of the roof, you just hold down Alt and you remove the section that you don't want. Again, just copying it with Control Command, or going here to copy, jumping into the other window, clicking Edit and Paste or Control V, and just transforming with the transformation tool, just a shortcut. And this is looking pretty weird, but like if you're trying to make like a little fantasy environment that doesn't really exist in real life, sometimes that makes sense. You wanna try to make something that looks a bit unusual, because it'll help create something that feels unique to what you're trying to create in your artwork. And again, you're just building up a reference that you are able to adjust later on. Now, I think this all looks way too scenic. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to add some trash here. Maybe you want like a kind of a dystopian setting, and just add some garbage. One more thing that I think we can do is we can also use the mesh transformation tool. So I kind of like this detail here in the house where it's just those windows. But what I really want to do is I want to move those here and just kind of create a bit of a curve. So I just copy this here, paste it here, copy the layer a few times, and then just have that a few times together. And then I will be merging the layer with the layer below, and I have like this row of like around 12 windows here that I want to now be adjusting. Again, I could be using just the regular transformation, but what I really want to do is kind of create a bit of a curve to the building. And what I can do that with is I can use the mesh transformation tool, which looks like this up here. And I can now create the individual points for or I have these individual points visible now, where I can adjust them and really just create bends in the piece of artwork or photo that I have here. So now it's turning into a very twisty, topsy-turvy kind of situation, which, maybe that's what you want. In this case, just for the sake of the tutorial, it is definitely what I want. I kind of like the messed up look that it has. It just looks very ramshackled. And yeah, I think that's good. Let's maybe look for another little roof detail to add in. And the thing is, you can use these methods not just for an exterior building, you can also use it to help you set up an interior layout. And you can even use it to maybe just combine references for a fashion outfit, or you could use it to, create a fantasy animal. And once again, here I will be using the mesh transformation tool. Now, this doesn't need to be exact, but it can still be helpful, especially if we want to just draw over these photos. Now, what you want to make sure is that you actually have the license for the photos that you're using if you are like drawing over them. For the sake of the tutorial, I used my own photos, but you are also able to look for Creative Commons license photos, specifically Creative Commons 0, which allows you to remix, edit the photos however you want without even having to give attribution to the original owner. You'll be able to find pictures like that at sources like Unsplash, Pexels, Wikimedia Commons, and many more. Just look it up online, and this is a good starting point. If you need more, I'm sure you will find them if you just look for Creative Commons 0 licensed photos. But again, we have a really weird looking thing here, and kind of something that I feel is missing is that I want a bit of an element in the front. So the last thing that I'm going to do here is just pull in this wall here that I like, and just going to pull that in here, transform it a little bit, not like that. But it kind of doesn't match the perspective that I want. So what you can do also to keep in mind is you can select an individual part of the photo, and then you can enter the transformation tool. And then that way you can just kind of extend the part of the picture to match the perspective that you want. So I've kind of just messed with it here, but I just wanted a little wall element. Because maybe I don't want this here up front to be a full-on street. I just want it to be a small street. So here, instead, I'm going to be tossing a little bit of grass in the front. Does this make sense as an environment? I'm not going to question that. For the sake of this workshop, we're not going to question that. The goal is to just show you a method how you can build your very own environmental reference. And if we're happy with what we have here, again, things don't need to be exact. We can just take all these images, throw them in a folder, and we can just put like a new layer over here. Just fill that layer with white and just lower the opacity a little bit. And now we can just go here and start drawing. And what I want to show you is that we don't need to be precise if we're following a reference that we build this way. This can just be like a rough guideline that we can use. So I might be changing up like the texture here. Maybe I want like a brick wall instead. But still, using these photos that way, I can just quickly create references for myself. Now I'm going to be speeding up the video here in just a moment so you can just follow along and see what I'm doing. But yeah, that's one of the ways that you can not just use photos as references, but build references with your photos. I think that's just a really cool and inventive way you can use photos that you made yourself or that you have the license for in your work. So as you can see, I ended up with this picture here. And maybe when we looked at the references, you were just like, how is this going to look like something that makes sense? And it makes sense because it is drawn with one cohesive visual style now, rather than being clearly just a mishmash of different photos. So you're able to, I mean, maybe you're saying this looks too outrageous, but maybe you're also trying to present a fantasy world of just like cobbled together houses that were just built very haphazardly. And that's kind of what I tried to go for here. And I think it worked out. And what you can also see if you compare the drawing, I added a bunch of details like here, just like some debris, a barrel, a bottle that aren't really present in the exact reference that I built. And, you know, unless you're trying to make like an exact reference of something because you want to have it be a very detailed drawing, I don't think that's necessary. You can just go along, have like a rough guideline with the reference that you're building. But still, you're building a scene out of a bunch of photos rather than just having a bunch of photos that you're combining in your mind. Like some people might find it easier to just have a mood board of photos and just have that there. Other people might find this approach easier. Whichever works for you, I think it's a fun exercise, and I hope that it was able to show you some fun ways to mess, especially with the lasso tool, with a transformation tool and a mesh transformation tool, and learn a little bit about that. So I'm gonna just save that right now. And now that I've saved the image, I'm gonna just move on to our second method, which is to add characters to an image. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that I think sometimes it can be fun to draw over an image. So one of the ways that I think you can add drawings to a photo is to create either tiny little fantasy scenes where you just add little forest spirits or critters or whatever to a picture. And you can do this with, you know, just a super simple drawing style. It doesn't have to be anything out of the ordinary or detailed. It doesn't have to look like it's fully fitting into the photo. It can just be a little cute thing. And I think this works especially well with small photos like macro photos because it's, you know, showing those kind of photos show you the world from a perspective that you usually don't see it from. So I think if you have a little scene like this here, we can just add a new layer. We could just start drawing some little guys. And again, I'm gonna just be making a new layer, just filling that with the rectangle tool, just lowering the opacity just for now so that I'm more easily able to see what I'm drawing. And I can just have like just a little guy here sitting up top, having a chill old time and just hanging out. All right, you can see that I ended up with some characters here. I've temporarily turned up the opacity of this layer to have full brightness. I'm going to use the fill bucket tool with the refer other layers option activated to now just add a really bright color that stands out. And I'm just going to be using that color for now to fill everything that I want filled. And I'll deal with the exact coloring later. For now, I just want to be able to have the spaces visible that I want color at. When I turn on the photo layer again and try to come up with colors that work well with the photo itself. All right, so I'm turning that off. And I will now turn on lock transparent pixels here in the layer window. And now I can choose some nice colors that I think would match these funky little sheep here. As you can see, I color pick directly from the image a part that's already kind of white. And that way I'm just able to kind of have a color that harmonizes well with the existing image. Again, I don't really care much about realism here in this image. It is supposed to be just a little fantasy setting. But what I still might want to do is have the scene have an influence on like the characters. So I'll be getting to that part in just a moment. For now, I'm just gonna finish picking my colors here. All right, so we've got a nice thing going here. But as you might notice, here there's kind of a leaf in the foreground that I want to actually be in the foreground. I did this intentionally because I want to use this opportunity to show you how you could use masks in an instance like this. So what we do is we create a new layer. We just drag this artwork into this folder, and now we create a layer mask. Now, using the eraser tool, we can just go here and create a mask. For this leaf here in the foreground, I'm using a soft brush to have like the slight blur from the foreground be present. And there you go. There's the leaf now looking like it's in the foreground. And what we're going to do next is we're also going to add just a little bit of shading to ground these creatures. Now, obviously, like the art style makes them stand out. They don't look very realistic. But we can still make them feel more part of this environment by creating some shading. So I'm just adding a new layer, and I'm using the multiply layer setting. And you can check one of my other videos for more information about various layer settings to get like a more in-depth view on them. Now, something else we might want to do is we also want to have some shading on the characters themselves. So it's kind of a bit of a darker scene here. So I'm just going to add another new layer, and using the clip to layer below feature here, I'm able to now draw only where there's a part of the image that is like in that folder. So I'm just able to create some slight shading here. Maybe that's a bit too much. I don't want it to seem too dark, but I'm still able to just give this scene just a tad bit more presence in the world. Likewise, I might want to brighten up our little shepherd guy here. use the lighten option. Maybe just add glow. There we go. And just have him stand out a little bit more. There we go. So I think there's just a bit more presence now to the characters and how they look in the world. Another thing that you could do is you could as well take this sheep in the front here. I'm just gonna cut that out from this layer, paste it on a new layer, cut it out from here, and then combine those two layers. And then I'm gonna go here to filter blur, and let me just move the window over here so you can see what I'm doing. And I'm gonna create a little blur effect. Oh, I had the transparency on, so it wasn't blurring the edges. Let me redo that. Make sure you have the transparent pixels not locked when you're trying to blur a layer. Otherwise, yeah, you'll get a sharp edge, which is exactly what I didn't want here. But as you can see, like the leaf in the front is a bit blurry, so I wanted the same for the sheep here. And maybe I'll even make that just a bit bigger and add maybe just a second sheep that's visible in the front. There we go. Just filling out the scene a little bit more. Actually, what I'll do is I'll copy this group of sheep here, just paste those over here. And now I'm gonna apply a slightly less strong blur to create, once again, I had the transparent pixels locked. So this is a learning experience. You get to see me fail. All right, so there's just a bit more sense of depth now. I can even have that here. As you can see, the parts of the image that weren't present when I applied the filter weren't affected by the filter. I can quickly adjust that now and add the filter again. There we go. So now there's just a bit more sheep, and we have that nice sense of depth to the picture that we already have in the photo, but applied to our artwork. Another good use case for something like this might be also a street scene, which I think works well if you want to showcase like more realistic drawings of characters, especially if they're more fashion focused. So let's give that a try real quick. All right, so this is an existing drawing of my character Dodger. He might be familiar with, and this one is kind of lineless. And I think with a more realistic style, you can just kind of add that well to a scene that's more urban. I don't think this is a particularly realistic style, but the fact that it's lineless makes it look less immediately cartoony. So I think that kind of character works well in a scene like this. There's nothing saying that here you have to use line art in this scene. That's just, like one way you can approach it. You could do the same in either setting, but I just wanted to show yet another way you could edit the photo. Now, what you might also want to do is you want to change up the colors of the photo itself. So let's just try to mess around a little bit with that. If you go to layer, new correction layer, you have a bunch of ways that you can adjust the color of a photo or add some certain effects. In this case, let's just give the posterization one a try. Now, as you can see, it's kind of making things more simplified. There's not as many color variations in the picture, and you're just making it a lot more simple. Now, I don't think the colors look particularly nice, but we're able to adjust the colors again later on. So what we could do is we could go here and add another new correction layer, and we could create a gradient map. Now there's a few already present in Clip Studio Paint by default, or you can make your own, whichever works. This doesn't work, I think. Now this already starting to look a bit better. I kind of like how this looks. And what we can also do to the picture is we can also create just a little bit of a blur effect, because the posterization will make things look rough anyway. So we can just kind of remove even more details and create a more smooth effect without really fully blurring the photo by adjusting the blur effect below the posterization. And now I think something else that could look nice is we could add here in the layer property window an effect of a border effect, making Dodger here look like kind of a paper cardboard cutout kind of thing. Like, this whole scene doesn't feel very realistic or cartoony. It just looks kind of like pop art. And I think having like that white border around the character helps in a way like set the character apart, but also make the whole thing feel a bit more cohesive. And I could also always go here and just, add more colors or manually adjust those colors. I can create a new layer and, for example, set the layer setting to color and start just giving that railing here just a bit more of a blue color, just to create a bit more variation in the color scheme if I don't want to use everything with the gradient map. And obviously I can be as detailed here, take my time with it, or just quickly and roughly do it. For the sake of the workshop, I'm just doing it really roughly, but you can always take more time to get a different result or a more detailed result. And I did kind of like how the original graffiti came out better. And what I could also do here is I could go back into the mask here of the gradient map, and I could just erase from there to keep the original colors present. Same for the posterization, honestly. Obviously now we have kind of the blur effect, but this almost creates like a bit of a watercolory vibe. And especially if I use a soft brush, I can create a really interesting look, I think, where I just have like some of the color present and some of the original detail, and elsewhere it is gone. So you can just experiment and mess around with that kind of stuff. Now, briefly before I move on from this picture, I want to show you an alternative option to using the posterization option that I showed you. If you have just a regular photo here, you can also go to Filter, Effect, Artistic, and now you get a whole bunch of options here. You can kind of just experiment with that. Colors and lines, you can either just pick color only, you can pick lines only, and with the lines only, you can see it's not looking too different from the posterization. But with colors and lines, you can adjust things to have more of a line art style, to have like a higher line thickness with more simplicity. Honestly, this tool is pretty powerful, and you're able to create an interesting look with it as well. Just, experiment with the options here. Maybe you'll prefer this style over the other one. As you can see, there's just a lot of different options. The color stuff doesn't show up as much, I think, with still having like the gradient map here. You can also adjust the amount of colors and reduce it. It's honestly a more detailed option compared to the posterization, but especially I think with combining with the blur effect, you can still create an interesting look. But maybe this is a different look that you would want. And heck, you could even, combine things. Again, just make a layer mask and then just combine the parts that you like from one method with the parts that you like from another, for example. All right. Now, maybe you're watching this and you would prefer to work in a more realistic art style. So, one of the other ways that you could possibly draw over an image and maybe go for a more realistic style that I think is interesting is you can kind of create a bit of a horror themed image. Just have a dark photo of like some urban scene, maybe. Just something that looks a bit abandoned, like this little corner of an unfinished building here. And you can just add in a kind of creepy looking critter. Now, maybe when you want to get started, you're like, this image is a bit too dark for my taste. Well, let's go back here to the layers, correction layers. And what you can do is you can either mess with the brightness and contrast, or you can also use the level correction or tone curve options. With the tone curve, you can adjust the tone curve for all of the colors, red, green, and blue, or all of them individually or together. Now, as you move this curve, you're able to see that it gets a bit brighter but more washed out. If you, however, move the points individually, it doesn't get as washed out. You're creating a higher contrast, and you're able to adjust things a bit more. So now I think the picture is a bit easier to work with. Again, we don't want to be too bright here. We still want the scene to be kind of creepy. What we can again do is we can use the tone curve mask and just kind of make it like just focused on a specific area in the image maybe that we want to draw attention to. There we go. All right. So now one more thing. If we already looked at earlier photos where we just combined, references to create things, now I think, as I mentioned, you can create fantasy creatures this way. So look at this funky little building statue detail. It looks pretty goofy, but if you saw that in like a really dark room at night, it would be kind of creepy. So let's also combine it. So we take this poor little sheep here. It's done nothing wrong, but we're just going to take this sheep and we're going to bump up the tolerance here with the magic auto select tool. That's a bit too much, the tolerance. We're gonna need to fine tune it. See, this is good. At a 10, I'm able to just easily grab kind of that sheep very quickly without needing to use the lasso. There we go. just clicking a few times until I have like the selection that I want. It doesn't need to be perfect, especially not for this workshop. And again, I'm removing some of the grass here, but I have this sheep here now. And I'm gonna switch back over, not to this one, not to this one, but to this one. And I'm gonna plop that sheep in here. And I'm gonna take this creepy face. Actually, I'm gonna just take this whole section. I'm just gonna copy paste that and transform it to fit on here. Now this still looks pretty goofy, especially because we have a very mismatched coloring here. So what we're gonna do is, once again, we're creating a correction layer. Let's try out the level correction this time. And we're just gonna quickly press OK, and now we're gonna once again clip to layer below. And now we're gonna make adjustments by double clicking this layer here, and it's gonna open up that window again. And now we're gonna be able to adjust the brightness of that image. And we're just moving the sliders to be dark, but not too washed out, not losing too much detail. So we're just messing with that a little bit until we have a result that we like. And it doesn't quite work out. So the dark parts are getting too dark, but the bright parts aren't getting dark enough. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new layer. And since I'm below the previous layer, this one is also going to clip to the background. And I'm using a soft brush. I'm just going to paint over here. And I'm going to use the layer blending method, darker color. I'm going to lower the opacity, but this already works pretty well, I think. And now I'm going to go back into the level correction. I'm going to mess with things again a little bit more. But I think this works better, having the darker color below to make things blend in the scene more, and then having the level correction for the overall contrast and darkness. And I'm going to add another layer, and this time I'm going to use multiply to just picking a color from the background and then creating a bit more shading, create a different shading that I want here. Maybe multiply doesn't work as well. Sometimes you just need to experiment with the different options that you have. Let's see. I think multiply works in this instance. What you can do sometimes in these instances is you can use more of a rough brush that has a bit more texture to it, to especially if you want like a more realistic look, to have that just texture and have it look more blended into the scene. And I think this is starting to look pretty creepy. Now, I do think it's, once again, as we've done with the previous little forest critters, it's not looking centered enough. So I'm just going to add a little bit of shading here on the ground. And of course, what we also can keep in mind is that we can create highlights as well. We can't just, we don't just have to make everything darker. We can also create highlights. Use the masks or erase something, or you can create a new layer and make another highlight. Now we'll also want to give this thing red glowing eyes, because of course we do. I don't think this is how Clip Studio Paint intended its sparkle brush to be used, but, you know, that's just how it has to be sometimes. Now, one more thing that we can do is, obviously, you know, if you're a like to paint, you can just paint something instead of using like photos that you're putting together. for the sake of the workshop, I'm not going to take like hours upon hours to paint something, but obviously it's an option for you. Now, if you paint something, it might look less part of the image than if you're already using photo elements that have like realistic texture and grain. But if you had painted something, you might want to make it look more like part of the image. So one way you can do that is you might want to add a bit of a noise. So what we're going to do is we'll create a new layer here and go to filter and render and select Perlin noise. So we want to scale this down quite a bit and mess with the settings a little bit. The scale helps make it more small, obviously, or big, and the amplitude kind of defines a little bit the contrast of it, I would say. The attenuation also, as you can see, kind of messes with how rough it feels. And now that we have that here, we can set that to overlay, and as you can see, everything just looks a little bit more grainy now. Honestly, we could put that grain over top of the full image. And what we can even do is we can try to make this thing look like it's moving. Because sometimes just a little bit of blur can make things look, you know, you're seeing things less clearly, so you're wondering what is it that I'm seeing. So I copied this folder here just by dragging and dropping it onto the new layer icon. And now I'm going to right click and merge selected layers. So notice what was previously a folder with a bunch of layers is now just a single layer. Now I can go in here to filter blur and use the motion blur. And there's, as you saw, there's a bunch of other blurs. And now I can adjust. Let me zoom in before I do this. Filter blur, motion blur. As you can see, this thing is moving now. Or at least it looks like the shaky camera footage captured it. And you can just mess with the settings here and see how it turns out and just adjust it until you're happy with it. But this is another way that you're able to make things look, you know, a bit more creepy or part of the image. Another option that you can do is you can kind of create a bit of a camera lens effect. So what I would do here is I would take this whole picture, just select all those layers, merge them, select the entire canvas with select all or Control A, copy it, undo all this, and just paste it again. Okay. So now what we're going to do with this is we're going to create a new correction layer. We're going to create a gradient map. We're going to use the red sunset here. We're going to merge that to the layer below. We're going to create a bit of an overlay effect. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to move that on top. And this time, we're going to use the blue sky option. And now, we're going to slightly move those layers apart. As you can see, there's a bit of like that effect now. But we're not quite happy with how it makes the picture look overall. So we're going to just mess with the layer options and settings until we're happy. But this kind of creates a bit of that camera effect. It's making the picture darker, as you can tell, but it still has like that nice camera effect. It's making everything look a bit more mysterious. And we can always just go here, create a new correction layer. This time, let's use brightness and contrast and just make the picture a bit brighter before we darken it with the other two layers. And there we go. There's our little creepy sheep guy. That was the second method, and I showed you 3 different applications of that. Again, doing a little cute forest scene where we learned a little bit about masking things and using the clip to layer below function to create shading, and using different layer blending methods to create shadows in just a cutesy cartoony style, or something with more of a poster photo edited look, or something with more of a realistic creepy vibe. Now, there's one more thing that we can do. Instead of using characters or adding characters to the photos, we can use photos as textures. So let me just pull up a photo and a drawing where we want to try that with. All right, so I don't know how this is going to work out. Let's just give it a try. Here I have this photo of my character Sammy, and now I'm trying to add a texture that is just of a rainy street. With the various layer effects, I can mess around here, and I can just add an interesting texture to the piece. It's just making it look a little bit more grungy, and I think like the original photos texture, or the original photos colors, also just add a little bit of interest to the piece. Now, you can try this with like a lot of different photos and a lot of different blending styles. Here, there's some water droplets. Let's see how those turn out. Now with the water droplets, I used the pin light feature. As you can see, like, this almost looks like just a bunch of like colorful spots. Like, I don't think it would be recognizable as water droplets anymore. And I kind of want to just increase that effect. So I'm just going to go in here and go to the Gaussian blur again. And actually, you know what? I'm going to use, just to show off, another one of the blurs. So let's use the spin blur. I just switched the photo mode because I think it's just taken a bit long to render and it's a bit hard to see the difference. And what you can do here is you can kind of move the little X to where you want it to be. So you can kind of create the focus of the spinning effect to be where you want it to be. So I think with that in mind, we can just kind of create a really interesting effect. I'm going to switch back to the pin light here. And going to go back into spin blur once more. And I now have like these kind of like interesting just light flecks, light spots that are just making the picture just look a little bit more interesting. I can even, you know, copy that layer another time and add some other settings for the layer effect. And obviously, right now, instead of creating a correction layer, I used edit tonal correction directly. Just keep in mind, if you do it like this, you're not able to adjust things again later. And now here, once again, I'm just creating a mask. And I kind of have created just a bit more of a dreamlike feel to this picture. Now, whether it's appropriate for this picture or not, you know, whatever. I think it might work better for like a dream scene in the comic, but I still think this looks kind of fun, and it's definitely a way that you can try to, you know, make a picture that you're maybe not quite as happy with look a little bit more interesting, just give it a new look. And it's always an option to just use photos to mess around with a picture, give it a bit more character, give it a bit more texture. So yeah, that's the last method. This one was a quick one, but I hope this little workshop helped you come up with some new ideas, figure out a few new things that you could do with photography and combining that into your illustrations. Thank you for watching, and yeah, see you until next time.